And when you change the context and you make people less aware, then it without that awareness of all of those things around you, when you have blinders on, it makes it that much easier to get away from the community mind, to be isolated, and to feel overwhelmed.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, Mental Health and Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa.
Hi, I'm Tenesha, and I am a mental health and wellness advocate. I'm also on the board at Heart and Soul Solutions, and I'm here in Illinois.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am Vice President at Heart and Solutions in charge of our Behavioral Health Department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today is Maggie Alton. She is a therapist in our Mason City office of Heart and Solutions here in Iowa. Maggie has her master's degree in social work. She is an LMSW here in the state of Iowa and really likes to focus on helping people work through childhood traumas that they may experience, especially those childhood traumas that kind of reintroduce themselves to us again and again as we grow as adults, and especially as well when we start our own families and start to parent our own children. So welcome, Maggie, to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me and bringing me back. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about, I know we talked about it a bit on the previous episode that you were on, but share us a little recap of why childhood trauma just really speaks to you and is so important to you.
Oh, I will try and keep it short. So, for me, simply there is a personal experience there that sort of made me interested in the background of how trauma sort of works and what it does to the brain and how it affects us as we go through life. And I always knew that I wanted to work in this field. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. Um, and actually, honestly, originally I was not necessarily looking at therapy, just because well, for lots of reasons, I just didn't know how much. I don't want to say how much good, but I am definitely kind of a macro focused person. That's why I went into the social work piece. Systemic issues, meso and macro issues really speak to me. And so for me, therapy felt really small, I guess, for lack of a better term. But as I have gotten used to therapy and gotten into this role, the more that I learn about trauma and attachment past what I got from my graduate degree. Of course, we do trainings and things, and I love to learn. And so I am always looking for new things. And so between the trainings that I've done on trauma specifically, but also attachment and all of these things, it for me just makes so much sense. It really helped me on a personal level to make things click, but also on a professional level because um, I always say this to my clients, context does not necessarily make it easier, but it at least makes you more aware. And so being able to have the context behind why maybe you're acting a certain way in, a parenting situation, yeah, that doesn't mean that it's going to be more comfortable or that it's going to be easier, but at least then you know, and that can take some of the personalization and the sting out of it.
Okay. How has your experience, as far as education and even personal experience with trauma, allowed you to help the clients that you serve? I know me personally, like, I've had childhood trauma, and sometimes even through counseling and therapy, I find myself certain things can trigger those old, traumas and issues, even now as a 47-year-old. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, with your training, your education, sometimes the clients you see, in your personal experience, are you ever triggered yourself, um, when you're trying to help someone else?
So there's a couple different pieces there that I want to kind of go over. So there's the piece of am I triggered, and then there is the piece of, how am I able to sort of take what I have learned and apply it and use it to help my clients. So the first thing I will say, and I've had this conversation, and by no means do I mean this as a judgment or anything, but you don't know what you don't know. And one of the things that I feel like probably was a benefit to me, as much as I would not have said it at the time, nor would I say that it excuses what happened to me as a child, is the fact that because I have personal experience, I'm not just quoting things out of a book. And so even though with my clients, I can't say that, I can't say, oh yeah, that happened to me too. I at least have it's not an empathy that I am trying to reach for. I've been there. Um, and that isn't, like I said, that's not a judgment because I would not wish some of the stuff that I went through on anybody. And so I do not think that that means that like therapists who come from the quote unquote, best family ever can't be good therapists. It just means that for me, in a way, I kind of have a leg up because I don't have to build that sense of empathy in this same way that somebody does who has never experienced some of those things, if that sort of makes sense. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think that was really helpful for me, honestly, and this was a complete and total accident, is the fact that I decided on a social work degree. And the reason that I say that, and and I will actually caveat that with not only did I choose a social work degree, but it was a complete accident that I got the the professors that I did and that I was in the program that I was, because things have changed drastically in the last 2 years as far as DEI and what things are being taught in our school systems and in our state universities and whatnot. But specifically, the reason that I think social work was a big boon to me is yes, I had that micro experience, but I grew up in Northwest Iowa. I have like no cultural experience whatsoever, and I fully admit it. And so what the social work degree did for me was really exposed me to that systemic side of things and how that all plays in, how poverty and racism and the fact that our welfare systems are so broken and the issues with our education system, all of that, and don't get me wrong, that's overwhelming when you look at it, but all of that really being able to see it from that macro side and recognize that, frankly, a lot of the things that I have heard living where and growing up where I grew up, that whole pull you up by your bootstraps is not realistic. Um, and so I really do think that a lot of my personal growth and a lot of my ability to empathize and connect with my clients comes from the fact that and my clients, they hear this all the time, that we don't live in a vacuum. And I am very aware of that fact now in a way that I was not before I got my graduate degree. And with that being said, specifically, I mentioned a person, Julia Kleinschmidt, and since I got my degree, she has left the University of Iowa, but I credit her specifically with changing a lot of the way that I think and really holding up a mirror to a lot of the stereotypes and things. And I know that there are a lot of people in my cohort that feel the same way. We've actually been talking about it recently with all of the changes in administration and whatnot. So, but then you did also have a second piece of your question, which was, am I triggered? Yes, there are times that I get triggered. I've worked very, very hard. And I certainly, have the coping skills and all of the things. But yeah, there are times that I get triggered, and it obviously does not happen often, but there have been a couple of times throughout my career, not, just here, where I at least have been able to build up my own awareness, and I know, like, today I am going to be worthless. If somebody says the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my stuff. And so those are the days that I tend to take off. Those are a sick day. Those are a mental health day or something else. I move clients around because I'm not going to be effective.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you mentioned like when you got into the social work field, you weren't thinking therapy. You're wanting to do like a bigger picture type thing. Can you kind of talk about the difference of like, well, social work then as opposed to potentially a different degree that someone would do to do therapy, and
Yes.
what kind of led you to do therapy then if that wasn't your original path?
So, okay, so there's all sorts of different degrees, and there are some that are very much more kind of individualistic, more micro. So there are specifically degrees you can get in mental health therapy, mental health counseling, marriage and family therapy, all of those licensed mental health counselor. The reason that I went for social work was partially because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't necessarily want to do individual stuff. I wanted to do macro stuff. If I could have my dream job, it would be as a lobbyist for nonprofits and capital, like really going against some of the current legislation and providing education to some of our elected officials on some of the stuff that they have done and are doing. Um, but I am very much a small town girl. I don't want to live in Des Moines. I don't want to live anywhere where legislators and whatnot actually, convene. And so and so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was thinking at one time maybe getting in like with like community education or like doing presentations, like public health or something like that. But in my brain at the time, social work would give me more options because then if quote unquote needed to, I could fall back on therapy. But um, as as I was going through my degree, I kept having people tell me, you should be a therapist. You should be a therapist. You'd be really good at, not that you're not good at all this other stuff, but you should be a therapist. And ultimately, to be perfectly honest, it just kind of came down again to sort of a luck thing. I had thrown out my applications, I had a few leads. This company seemed like a good fit. I knew that in order to get my LISW, I was going to need supervision. That obviously is a thing that, and so it was a very pragmatic decision. With that being said, though, I have greatly enjoyed it. I've actually told my husband several times, I'm like, this is the first job I have ever had that I can honestly say, don't get me wrong, there are days when, whatever was spoken about is heavy on my heart or days where I'm triggered. But there is not a day that I don't like my job or, I'm like forcing myself to get up. I really do feel like I am helping people. And it kind of switched on me because I am helping people in that I am helping individuals figure out and learn how to work within this system that is broken, but also to recognize that the system is broken. It's not you. It's not that you fundamentally have something wrong with you that you can't keep up on all these societal demands. Societal demands are incredibly unrealistic and they're contradictory. There's a reason we can't keep up with them.
Absolutely. I think what you're describing, taking that wide worldview and all the pieces of us and all the situations that we've been in for our whole lives and all of those pieces have that impact on us in that wide view. And those are things that we really, so many of the time, especially as we're a child, we don't have any control over those things in our lives. We don't have any control over, our family's financial situation or our family's ability to access resources. We don't have control over the way that other people might think about things. And so, uh, going through that, it changes us in so many ways. And then our society also at the same time tends to take such an individualistic approach to mental health, but also to just the things that we are expected to do. You mentioned pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. That's such a challenge when the things that are those forces in society that are impacting us that we don't have control over are shaping those things and creating those challenges for us as individual people. But then when it comes down to, well, who has the responsibility here? All the responsibility is put on the individual person. And that dynamic causes so much stress for our bodies, so much stress for our minds, and so much complication for us emotionally because there is such a sense of, yeah, I should be able to do, right?
That
Like I
word
should be able,
should.
yes, I should, but right? And I'm expected to, and I have
Mhm.
to, and all of these pressures that we put on ourselves. And so I love the approach that you take, even though it is individual therapy. It is one-on-one. You're working with one child, one adult, one family. But because you have that wider approach, you're able to help those individuals to consider those pieces and look at the places where they do have control. We do have control over, maybe we don't have control over that phenomenon that's happening to us, but we have control over how we respond to that phenomenon that's
Absolutely.
happening to us and how we advocate for ourselves within that system. Uh,
Hmm.
so I just love the approach that you're taking. And you mentioned that your master's degree program in social work had really helped you to understand those different worldviews and different situations that people are in. And then you mentioned that you feel like in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of changes with that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? It's a very important topic, I think, right
It
now.
is. I
Uh,
agree.
yeah, those
Um,
changes that are happening in the field in general, and for the clients that we're working with.
So shortly after I left University of Iowa, got my degree, I think roughly a year-ish after I got my degree, they, I know, started to roll back some of their DEI initiatives, including some of the stuff that is going to be required for our degree. For example, like one of my required classes was, oh God, is DOD. I can't remember what the first one is. Oppression and diversity. But, basically, going over racism and poverty and how all of these things and, and that was no longer going to be required. And I don't know all the ins and outs of what that looks like now. But I also mentioned earlier that I know that like Julia is no longer at University of Iowa. I'm not sure who they have coming in her place, but with that being said, not just in University of Iowa and in our colleges, but across our nation right now, we are seeing a very large rollback in DEI programs, among other things, that is being led by the current president and his administration. And I think that potentially part of the issue is that there is a misunderstanding of what DEI means. A lot of people, when they hear things like DEI, they assume that we are talking about race or we are talking about LGBTQ rights or they kind of go to those really, to be fair, controversial for whatever reason, whether they should be or not, sort of topics. But that's not the full picture. DEI is things like parental leave. DEI is things like ramps and accommodations for people with disabilities. DEI is nursing rooms for mothers. Those are all diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. They all are now, you know, being challenged slash they are at risk. Um, I'm trying to remember because I just saw it this morning. There was actually an action step from the Iowa chapter of the National Association of Social Workers because there is currently some bill that has come up in Iowa that will change how mental health providers provide services, and I can't remember what it was. It literally came up this morning, so I will get a hold of you guys after I find out what that is. But I mean, it's not just our state, it's everywhere. Like I know that there are states currently in the union that have bills that have not passed but have been introduced where like individuals who are 19 cannot get gender affirming care. 19 is not a minor. These are problems. This is a problem. Again, talking about like women's health care. Um, Regardless of how you feel about abortion, by rolling these things out, we have created a women's healthcare desert in Iowa. We are falling quickly in terms of the healthcare that is being provided in our state. And regardless of how you feel about elective abortions, abortions are part of women's healthcare. Ectopic pregnancies happen, incomplete miscarriages happen. If abortion at the level that they are currently talking had been federally banned back when my grandmother was like, I would not be here. Like, and yeah, it is absolutely an issue. Um, and it does concern me a little bit about what that means in terms of future social workers, future counselors, what they are going to be taught versus what they know versus what is socially acceptable. How that may, as we go forward, start to affect our rules and regulations and codes of ethics and all of these things. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who are, who are thinking that the rest of us potentially are, being dramatic or being, exaggerating it, but mm, it goes fast.
In the healthcare field for myself, I came from Chicago.
Okay.
So I was in an inner city um, setting. And then when I moved to Minnesota, when I started working at the Children's Hospital there, that was the first time that I had like diversity training, only because we serve a large population of Somalian residents and Hmong residents.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of cultural things that we could be like normal things we do, like hand gestures. Like I might talk with my hands like I'm doing now. That's offensive in the um Hmong culture. So it's like we're learning all these different things, which was like, I was like, oh wow, like I never knew, like all these different cultural things can be offensive to people. So we always had like diversity training every year. And I did part of my college also in Minnesota. So when I did my sociology class, I was in a sociology class of a lot of diverse individuals. So I was able to learn about different cultures and like what is expected, what is, accepted. Like in the Somalian culture, I found out that like if it's a mom and dad present in the room, mom will put her head down. You can't talk to her. You have to talk to dad. So it's like it's all these little things. And I'm saying that to say, like, I heard you say you come from a small town. So sometimes people have preconceived notions about a specific, it could be race, gender, or whatever. And if you're servicing a particular community, I think sometimes having like cultural and diversity training, you can understand like culturally what this particular group of people like face or deal with. Like, have you ever had like in your training process or even for an employer, diversity training to make you kind of aware of the community that you're serving?
Mhm. So I have not, so prior to Heart and Solutions, I did not have any sort of like diversity training with my bachelor's. Now, with that being said, I did work for different, a couple of different programs that still um made that something that they valued. Now, I can't speak because that's, been, oh Lord, 15 years ago. I don't remember at the t now if that was something that was mandated at the time or not, but I do know that they made it a point. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, I was a case manager at one time actually up in South Dakota. I never worked with our Hmong population, which is probably a good thing now because I speak a lot with my hands. I didn't know that. But we also had a lot of Native Americans. And so we actually, again, it wasn't required, but my team had learned about the different tribes and some of the different dynamics and things so that we could better help our clients, particularly because we had a couple who were from like rival tribes, and so we had to like keep them apart and all sorts of things. Um, Again, I would say that probably the majority of my training in terms of diversity comes from my graduate program. I not just in terms of the fact that there were classes, but just like the required reading, for example. Like one of the first books that was required for me was Me and White Supremacy. Um, I cannot I don't remember if this is the exact title. The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Actually, it's a memoir about a Hmong individual. Yeah. And that book actually opened my eyes to a lot of stuff like around Vietnam and what the US promised that then we decided to take back. I personally, I mentioned earlier I love to read, so I have always just sort of liked to learn about different cultures. Long before I worked up in South Dakota, I personally just read like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and some of those Black Elk Speak, some of those just because I wanted that reference, but I know that that is not necessarily the case. Um, but yeah, no, I would say that probably a lot of the diversity and inclusion that I and trainings that I have come across have been either graduate school or after, either because of it being required either for graduate school or as part of training for my job. But at the same time, because and this is again part of where I go back to Julia, her choices on what we went through in class were such that then it made you want to learn more. And so you would seek out, and she was always really good at, and here are other resources if you want to look further into this. Um, but yeah, it isn't it was just starting, I think, to become like a mandate of sorts. Like when I was doing my practicum with a hospice organization, they were just starting to roll out their company-wide DEI training slash policies. But I mean, now with the current administration, I don't know either how much of that will stand. I know that there are a lot of big corporations anyway who took that and like immediately rolled things back. So, which again is concerning because unfortunately, if you don't mandate people to learn it, a lot of people won't, which in and of itself is a problem. But regardless, here we are.
Yeah, definitely. How do you think learning that in grad school helped you become a therapist, the therapist you are now, and how might like taking that away, which it sounds like it is happening a lot of places, affect current or new therapists, like not having that training in school?
Um, Awareness. Like Tanisha said, it there is, when you grow up, especially in, one little area, rural area, you've known the same people your whole life. It's a very different than say growing up in like Cleveland, Ohio. My husband grew up in Cleveland, inner city Cleveland. And so like even without training or his experiences with diversity and whatever are very, very different than what I have. And it's interesting because despite that, there are still stereotypes and things around specific races or what have you. And so um, I think in grad school, and not, I mean, to be fair, not just in grad school, the fact that they are looking at our public education curriculum and looking to scrub it is a problem too, because then it's not even, people aren't aware. Like, um, I honestly do not know if this passed or not, but I know at one time when they were talking about critical race theory and all of that here, what was that, about a year and a half ago? Um, there was, basically an idea of presenting slavery as, yeah, they were slaves, but we were providing them with like life skills and work job skills, which, and like they didn't ask to be here. They didn't need our help with these skills. Um, and by changing that narrative, I'm trying to think what was Trump's American values that I heard. Ennobling and patriotic were the two that I heard that worry me because if you are presenting everything as ennobling and patriotic, then you're not presenting the truth. We have done horrible things. We continue to do horrible things. Period. End of story. And scrubbing it doesn't make it any less true, but it makes us less aware. And by being less aware, then it's much easier for us to just go along with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Changing the narrative and provide, you talked about context earlier and how context for things, it doesn't it doesn't change the narrative necessarily, but it helps us understand and it helps us to be aware. And changing the narrative on our history and trying to make it appear more noble, making it appear a different way is changing the context. It's taking the context away and adding different context that
Right.
didn't happen.
I was going to
Um,
say and that's just it is, I mean, is when you're taking that context away, it is such a slippery slope because there is omission, there's exaggeration, there's outright lies, which we are not above, despite what people may like to think. Wouldn't be the first time. Um, yeah, it is. It's changing the context. And when you change the context and you make people less aware, then it without that awareness of all of those things around you, when you have blinders on, it makes it that much easier to get away from the community mind, to be isolated, and to feel overwhelmed. It's not, conspiracy hat. It's not necessarily a accident that our society has built itself in a way that people cannot keep up. If you are tired and you are constantly stressed and trying to keep up, well, then your attention is not on what's going on in terms of policy, or you don't have the ability. And we're actually seeing this right now. There are people, I've been seeing it all over social media, who are saying things like, I would love to protest, but I can't take a PTO day, which, I mean, in and of itself is, people may have to shift their priorities a little bit, but even regarding that, I mean, that hints at a bigger problem. If people do not have the ability because they're afraid of losing their job or their health insurance or feeding their kids or paying rent, then it's a lot easier for that context to go away, and all of a sudden, you know, here we are, and this is the way it's always been. And again, we're seeing that a little bit right now too when they shut TikTok back the blah, blah, blah. When they took TikTok down for what was it, like 24 hours, 12 to 24 hours, and everybody ran to Red Note, everybody saw that what we are hearing here is not the truth. They aren't destitute over there. They are really truly living better in many ways than we are here. So yeah, context is a lot. Context means a lot.
And so as we're thinking about working with adults who have experienced childhood trauma and are now going through this period where it feels very isolating. It feels very difficult to build community right now. And it feels very like busyness, right? Like busyness, like so many of us just feeling like we're in survival mode
Yeah, the
so
world
much
is
of the
burning and
time.
we keep going to work. And that's a
Yes,
very odd cognitive
it
dissonance
is.
to be
It
in.
is. That is, I mean, that's very, very stressful. And so as we're thinking about being adults who have gone through childhood trauma and are reparenting ourselves and while we're maybe parenting our own children, what kinds of effects are you seeing for those adults and how can we, if we're hearing ourselves in this situation, what are some things that we can do?
To some degree, it depends a little bit, obviously, on how the intersectionality of all of these issues are kind of happening. For example, like I have individuals on my caseload who are both um, African American as well as lesbian. There's two issues right there. And so there's kind of two things that they're aware of. And so, there's that intersectionality that can absolutely come in. Overall, what I am seeing is a lot of anxiety, a lot of triggering, a lot of hypervigilance is what I'm seeing. Everybody that kind of, not just people that have childhood trauma, although they definitely are here, but just people in general are feeling like they're waiting for that other shoe to drop and they're not sure what it is. And part of that, to be fair, going back to the social work stuff, is by design. There is a tactic called shock and awe. And I would argue, and I know that others have argued, that Trump is using that right now. If you throw enough stuff out at people that shocks them, it eventually sort of wears them out. They burn out, and then they don't have the energy to fight you. There's also kind of the secondary, if you throw enough stuff out, something's going to get through because somebody's not paying attention or what have you. Um, and so that in and of itself, I feel like is really burning people out because um, on one hand, people want to stay informed, I feel like, which absolutely we should be informed. But on the other hand, there is so much stuff going on right now that it feels exhausting. I mean, full disclosure, I felt it. Like, yeah, it's a lot right now. And so in terms of what to do, and obviously, everybody is a little different, but I kind of go back, and I know I wrote for our newsletter on this a while ago, but I go back and, hopefully this is not controversial or offensive to anybody, but I go back sort of to the Serenity Prayer. And not that I am religious or think that the religious part in and of itself is the priority piece here. But for me, that is sort of the perfect embodiment of acceptance and commitment. You accept the things you cannot change, and that part is hard. Radical acceptance in and of itself is hard. And so I think maybe the first hurdle that people run into is feeling like if I accept it, then I am submitting. It's not that you're submitting. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to intend to necessarily just go along with it, depending on what you're talking about. But you have to accept that it's happening. You have to accept that you cannot stop it on this level. And for people who have been traumatized, that's really hard. And you're gonna feel some uncomfortableness. You're gonna feel some anxiety. And so, kind of checking in with yourself. I use affirmations and coping skills a lot. And checking in with yourself and reminding yourself, one, that the anxiety that I am feeling right now is valid. I am not overreacting. There is a difference between anxiety, the feeling, and like anxiety, the disorder. And anxiety, the feeling is totally valid right now. There is absolutely a legitimate threat. And I think too, to be fair, and we haven't touched on this, but I think potentially part of the reason that it is so re-traumatizing for people is not only are we looking at marginalized communities and we're pulling back those protections they've worked so hard for that should not be up for debate, but at the same time, we have somebody in the White House, as well as some of our congressmen and others, who literally embody the trauma that people have gone through. You have somebody who, at least in civil court, has been found liable for sexual assault. You have a convicted felon, and not to say that felonies should necessarily keep you from rights after you have served your time and done whatever you need to do. But I mean, there is a lot of hypocrisy that we have a felon up in the White House. He can't even go to some of the countries that we would need him to go to. And yet at the same time, any quote unquote normal felon can't get help with housing, can't get a job, can't get anything. Um, yeah. And so it absolutely is re-traumatizing on that level too. But going back to, if you're feeling that anxiety, first acknowledging it, saying, I feel you, I acknowledge you, and I understand there is a legitimate threat. Even, and I know that sounds silly, but just saying that to yourself is kind of like dropping the rope. You're not denying that there is anxiety, you're not denying that there is an issue, you are just stopping the fight against it. So first, acknowledging, yes, there is anxiety, and yeah, the situation is not cool. Second, what can I do? What is within my power? What can I control? And for a lot of people, I feel like this is potentially an opportunity. And obviously, I would prefer that this is not an opportunity that came up for people this way, per se. But individuals who have trauma, um, depending on where they are in their healing journey, they can rely on some of that stuff if they've been able to process it and heal from it and bring it back in as like resilience. For example, people maybe who grew up with food insecurity, and so they learned how to do things like scrap gardening, which I don't know if you guys have ever heard of. Scrap gardening is like you take like the green onions or cabbage or whatever that you bought at the grocery store. There's certain things that you can put in pots or in water and it will regrow. So you're getting more for your money. Potatoes, same thing, put in milk crate, gallon milk jugs with all of that kind of thing. Maybe that's something. Maybe it is having conversations around that shame of having to go to a food pantry when you were a kid and being able to get past that and being like, you know what? This is insane. Food prices are insane, and there is no shame in me using this resource that I can in order to feed my family. That kind of thing. There is an opportunity there to build resilience depending on where you're at, and just to kind of harness what you do know. And I've seen a lot of that, whether people, right, wrong, or otherwise, the individuals who have some trauma, I feel like are kind of resorting back to that survival mode, like you said, but for them, I feel a little bit of a resignation. And for me personally, I would say I feel a little bit of a resignation, like, God, I thought I was out of this. Like, I thought I didn't have to go back here and use these skills anymore. On the other hand, at least I have them because I know there are a lot of people out there who don't know how to can or forage or, whatever it is. Um, and so they are at a disadvantage, and so but regardless, doing whatever it is you can control, first. And something I've been telling people too is, in terms of that exhaustion and feeling like there's so much to do, because I think that's another aspect is people are like, oh my God, I need to get a passport and I need to stock up my food and I need to, pay off debt and I need to do all of these things. You can't do it all in a day. And so focusing on doing something every day instead. You are making forward progress every day. And so whether that is, I know a lot of people are like unsubscribing from Amazon Prime and those sorts of services, or have started using Goods Unitas, which is an app slash website where you can go and see what your favorite brand slash store does politically. Um, so like I know Walmart is about 50-50 in terms of their political contributions, but like Costco is like all the way Democrat, which is why we're seeing such a big push for Costco right now, that and their refusal to move backwards on DEI. Um, but using your money to to vote. I mean, and yeah, absolutely that can be an inconvenience, and by no means am I saying that, if Walmart is your only place where you can afford groceries, then go to Walmart. Eating is more important. But at the same time, if you have that ability, doing things like that, again, scrap gardening, starting a garden, looking at, energy efficiency, all of those things are little things that we can do that help us feel more in control and more prepared going forward. One of the biggest things I would say too, and this is something that I feel like has come up with almost every client, is really watching what you consume. We are what we consume, not just what we eat, but in terms of social media, in terms of podcasts and books and all of the stuff, people that we're around and what they're saying. And so if you find yourself doom scrolling or find yourself, you know, constantly checking news sources because things are constantly changing, trying to set some boundaries and parameters for yourself around that. Um, Me personally, I check it in the morning at this point, about 15 minutes in the morning to see what happened overnight. And then I check it about 5 o'clock because that gives them time to figure out what happened overnight and what's actually going to go and what's not. Um, at this point, that seems like a fairly good, but I set a timer and I have certain times. And of course, everybody that might be different. I've been telling people really watch what news stations you're watching because some of them are more doom and gloom because they're looking for ratings instead of actually providing news. All of those sorts of things too absolutely can have an effect. Um, yeah. And then the other thing I would say too, and a little bit contradictory, I will grant, but is looking for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers said, looking for the people who who are doing the work and who are speaking out and all of those things. Um, I was gonna say personally, I'm still like a little bit happy from the Super Bowl. That's a great example. Kendrick Lamar using his platform to get a message out, and obviously I know there's a lot of controversy around it, but he is a helper. He is absolutely putting it out there. AOC, Bernie Sanders, and other people too. I apologize. I do not remember her name, but the bishop from the National Prayer Service, another one. Looking for those people who are not just rolling over, the people who are great examples of maintaining that calm, controlled, um, on it, Samuel Jackson too. Even though he played a small part in the Super Bowl, he has been an activist for his whole life, basically. So, but just looking to those people, and not just those people, but even looking back on history and showing ourselves that, things have been chaotic and cruddy and nasty before, and we have always managed to, through the civil rights movement or through the Civil War, or, and don't get me wrong, those are bloody and they were awful, but we have always managed to bring it back around. And so, doing what you need to find that hope. Because absolutely right now, that I feel like is the biggest thing, is doing what you can to find hope and joy so that that burnout and that negativity does not just take hold.
I thought it was great that you brought up the serenity prayer and talk about building resilience. I just was doing a teaching on that on TikTok last night, talking about self-care and, building resilience and how do you set like personal boundaries. Me, myself, I had to do that myself with, and I always tell people personal boundaries are not just with friends, but it can include family, loved ones, your workplace, and I provided examples of way they can say things where it's not like you're coming off mean. I said the word no is so powerful.
Yeah. And it's
Like
a
telling
complete
people,
sentence.
yes, that's exactly what I said. I said telling someone no, it's not a bad thing. And like
Mm-mm.
you say, in regards to, the times we're living in and administration and things like that, I was just telling my mom, I said, I feel like we living in the history books that I read. Like everything have went backwards. And I was like, that's just crazy to me, Like I mean the amount of, racial comments and things you hear and just I was like, what is happening? Like I read these
Yeah.
things in third grade and I feel like we're living it now. So
Hmm.
it's just amazing and a little appalling to see sometimes the agendas that they push in
Yeah.
regards to, like anything related to LGBT, the alphabet community. It's like that is pushed so much on all these social platforms, and why I don't, like I don't have an issue with no race, whatever you choose to do, your choice is your choice. But you can't allow, I mean, just because a person has a choice, that don't mean you have to agree with the choice that
Right.
they made. That's just like for us, if it's something that we're doing, everybody's not going to agree with the decision you make and things that you do.
Right.
But I see you have such a passion in regards to the things that's going on now. And I totally, when you talk about, having a felon in the at the top of our country, and I feel like I was just telling my friends and family, I said, well, if he could run the country, then they should stop doing background checks for, regular employees. I said, because how is that fair?
I would say
Like
the
you
hypocrisy of it all. Yeah,
yeah, it's like,
absolutely.
okay, so why a regular felon can't, get a job at Walmart or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be? Like when you have someone who's running the country, like it's so hypocritical.
Mhm.
Um, and I just agree with a lot of things you said in that regard. So my question for you now would be, how does what's going on now affect how you do your job in regards to the community that you serve? And like you say, all the different changes. I always tell people, like, working in healthcare, things change all the time. I was just telling people that last night. Like, I have to always like check my emails before I start work because something done changed, from
Yeah.
nothing's the same from day to day. Stuff change all the time. We have, insurance updates, policy procedures. So you can't get comfortable. I mean, we live in a world you can't be comfortable and complacent with one thing. The world is ever changing, and that's in every aspect, not just healthcare, but the changing. I
Right.
mean, look at and how far that has came. So, yeah, that is my question to you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're right. I am incredibly passionate about what is going on right now, and my code of ethics binds me in sessions to being non-political. So for me, that part has been hard. And it's really hard because right now there are clients who are like, "What do I do? I don't know what to do." And so for me, it's been providing information, providing facts. Like for example, and really, this sounds awful, but really I've noticed that I am much more aware of how I am saying things and what I am saying things because I recognize that there is now a threat there that wasn't. And not that I was being unprofessional before, but it I recognize now that like one word taken wrong could get me in a lot of trouble. And I don't like it, but that is the reality of what we live in. But like for example, I've had several clients who are like, I don't know where to go to find real information, all of that kind of thing. Um, then and I will say things like, well, here is facts. The facts are that currently the same people who own our major corporations own our media. So if you were looking to get real information, then you would want to look at outside sources. For example, BBC or, things like that. And trying to advocate for my clients and to help them find those resources and educate themselves while recognizing that, like I said, it's very different now. And I think for me too, part of it is like a lot of my caseload is people that I have been working with for a very long time. So like we already knew where we were at, even though we've never said it. And so I think for me, it's just sort of like you said, feeling like I'm in a history book and recognizing that I have to be very careful about what I say to who. If I have a new client who comes in and I say one wrong thing, there may be a day when there's a hotline that they can, call me in, and that sounds really exaggerated, but there's already a bill that's been introduced down in it's either Alabama or Mississippi, I think, down in the South, for immigrants along that line. Like it's not that far-fetched. Um, and then at the same time, I know, just kind of making sure again, and not that we aren't conscious already, but that what we're putting in our notes, which can be pulled, is not incriminating in any way. I've been starting to try, like, for example, clients that have a same-sex partner, I'm starting to put partner instead of wife or husband or whatever, to make it more ambiguous. With that all being said, though, um, and I've said this many, many times to my husband here in the last few weeks. I am very glad that even though I tripped into this position, literally, that I found this position. I would feel much less secure if I worked for a nonprofit or a federal agency right now. The fact that I work for a private practice in and of itself, and who knows how long this will be, but it is somewhat insulating. The other thing I will say is that we do have an amazing team, um, who is keeping up with all of these changes. Yeah, and God bless Em, because right now she's got to be just losing her mind, but she does a really good job of keeping up with how the policies are changing and what that means for us and what we need to do. Um, yeah, I mean, within what was it, like a week and a half, we had red cards and all of that stuff. It was quick, which I really appreciate. And again, for me, because I am passionate about the stuff that's going on right now, again, just makes me feel like, yes, this was a good choice. So, you know, but yeah, it's and then just taking it one day at a time, because you're right, things change, and I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Um, but all I can do is, what I can do today with what I know and how things are, and tomorrow is a different day. Especially now, I feel like it is an exercise in presence. Can't worry about later because you have no idea what's coming.
Well, thank you for joining us again, Maggie. This was a great episode and great conversation, very relevant to today's world for sure. If you are listening and you are interested in therapy with Maggie, you can find her at heartandsolutions.net. And thank you to our co-host, Tenesha Gatson. If you are interested in hearing more about Tenesha's work, you can look her up on Spice to Your Life and read her blog there as well.
I'm Maggie Alton, and I need a counselor.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
I'm Tenesha Gatson.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
And so do you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.